Okay, hello and good evening, everyone.
Hi.
Here we are again. So, as everyone probably knows, this is the 1916 committee lecture series for December. The 1916 committee was formed back in 2014 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 1916 Easter Rising. And after the 100th anniversary passed and we set up a monument down at the Famine Committee, a lot of stuff hit the fan in terms of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, what is known as Brexit. This is why we have a banner here that says "No hard border in Ireland," which is the threat that Brexit presents. Since that vote by the United Kingdom, we have done a lot of lobbying in this country. Marie McGee has headed that up. Marie also put out some literature in the back explaining the nuances of what's been going on. There's an organization that many of us are part of called the American Brexit Committee, which exists to see that Ireland's interests are protected in any United States, United Kingdom kind of trade deal or negotiations that are going on. We've been very fortunate in that all four of our congressional representatives have signed up and agreed that there will be no new trade deal with the United Kingdom if in any way it affects the Good Friday Agreement or establish a land border in Ireland. So that's very good. Of course, it's not over. There's another election next year and another election 2 years after that, and they could change the dynamics of that. Trump, of course, promised Boris Johnson and Theresa May a great trade deal once they left the European Union. Hopefully that's been stopped now and stopped for good. But there's literature back there that you can get a lot more information. And when this is over, you can talk to Marie, myself, or any of the more active members of the committee. For the first time in a long time, it was real good news this week from Ireland. In a remarkable turn of events, the United Kingdom Department of Defense, in other words, the British military, has been a court ruled that they have to award $1.2 million to the survivors of the Miami Showband Massacre and the relatives of the three men who were killed in that incident. Very briefly, in 1975, the Miami Showband, which was like kind of a rock band, playing in both the North and the South, played a gig in the North. They were driving back into the Republic. They were stopped at a road check by British soldiers and RUC members and UVF members. And what the plan was that the British soldiers were going to place a bomb into the car, into the van. It was going to blow up when it got into the Republic. And the British were going to use it as a propaganda coup to say, see, even these musicians are with the IRA and running weapons and guns back and forth and bombs. The bomb went off prematurely. Both soldiers got killed. The members of the band were out on the roadside. Once the bomb went off, the soldiers and cops opened fire. They killed 3 of the band members. 2 of them escaped through a miracle of acting dead in a ditch. And they're both alive today. But this is the exact reason why we are fighting against the British government's attempt to give amnesty to all the British soldiers and policemen who committed these kind of atrocities going back to 1969 in the North. There was another incident in 1971 that I don't know if Gene is going to get into, but in Ballymurphy section of Belfast, 10 innocent civilians were executed by British soldiers. Nobody was ever charged. Nobody was ever exonerated until last year when Irish men wrote a book proving that it was collusion between the government and the terrorists of the UVF. But that's just a good news story. Hopefully there'll be many more, but we have to fight against that amnesty. The only other thing I'm going to mention is that the 1916 committee is in the process of trying to build a monument to the 10 hunger strikers who died in 1981. We are hoping to locate the monument at the Famine Memorial Site in downtown Providence. We're in negotiations with them right now. We feel very strongly that that hunger strike was a watershed moment in Irish history. It created a situation where the bullet began to be replaced by the ballot, and now you have a situation in Ireland where Sinn Féin is in the ascendancy on both the North and the South, and it's scaring the hell out of the career politicians in Dublin. And we've had a couple of fundraisers, very successful. Obviously, there's a lot of support for our ideas. On the back table near the door, there are pins and keychains that Ed Johnson designed with the help of George Doyle and George McLaughlin, and they're for sale, and most of the profit goes to our Hunger Strike Memorial Fund. And enough of that. So we've had a lot of great lectures in this hall. I'm really looking forward to this tonight. I met Gene 2 months ago, maybe a month ago or something, up in the Berkshires in Pittsfield. This guy's got a story and a half. He has a book. I've read the book. The book is a page turner. It is really, really interesting. I'm not going to say anything more than I already said in the emails, but we're just going to turn it over to Gene, let him go. You're going to be fascinated with his story, with the story of what he saw in Ireland. And then beyond that, once Gene finishes, people have questions, he'll be happy to take them and answer and everything like that. And then hopefully we can all go downstairs and have a little Christmas cheer and things like that. So this is Gene Christie. He is going to talk about the 5th novel that he has written. And I'm sure he's going to give you background on all the other ones, but this is the one that we are particularly interested in, Isle of the Blessed. Gino.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you, Mrs. Jim, Nancy, for the pleasure of your company at dinner tonight. And also thank you to my brother-in-law, Patrick Gable, who's sitting right over there, for driving me here from the Berkshires today. And thank you all for coming. It's great to see all of you. I love Rhode Island. I'm a graduate of URI. I did my master's degree there in 1970. And prior to that, I did my bachelor's degree with the good Jesuits of Boston College up in Boston, where I come from. And my daughter, Ashleen, was born in the South County Hospital in 1969 here in Wakefield, Rhode Island. So I have the fondest memories of Rhode Island, and I'm always glad to be back here. And I think not only is the entire landscape flat, and not only is the scenery beautiful, but the best thing about Rhode Island is the people of Rhode Island. And so I'm always glad to come back here. The last time I was here in Cranston, I think I was playing in the Irish show band that I played with for 10 years up in Boston, which was called the Black Velvet Band, of all things, named after the Irish folk tune. And that was a great band. And we traveled all over the 6 states of New England. And I'm just happy to be back here again tonight. Now, as to this book, it's called The Isle of the Blessed. And a little bit of background that I'll give you is that this book is a work of fiction, in the sense that all of the events and characters in the book are either fictitious or they are used fictitiously. In other words, you'll encounter in this book people such as Rory O'Brady, who was the president of Sinn Féin in my day in Dublin. You'll meet his brother, Sean O'Brady, who was the Chief Information Officer. And you'll meet other historical characters like Joe Cahill, who was at one time Chief of Staff of the Belfast IRA, the Provost. And in some cases, you will encounter them in scenes where they are speaking. And I'll tell you, it took me 50 years to write this book, because the time I spent, and by the way, although it's a fictitious book with fictitious events and fictitious characters, it is based on personal eyewitness experience. I was there, and I was fortunate enough to be a member of Sinn Féin and a part of the Irish Republican movement during the year of internment in 1971 and 1972. So I just wanted to explain that, because I don't tell anyone that this is a memoir, because I am making no attempt to claim that I'm telling the total and complete truth in this book. And that's because some names are changed to protect people. And that's because I myself don't want to be liable to retribution from the authorities in Ireland. And when you read the book, it's going to explain why I might be targeted in that manner. And so I'll just say this. When I left Ireland, it wasn't my own choice. It was by order of the special branch in Dublin Castle. And when I asked when I could return, their reply was never. So currently today, I'm still under this lifetime ban, and I'm not allowed to return to Ireland. Now, I did return one time, but that's another story. So let me just begin by reading the blurb on the back cover of the Isle of the Blessed, so you'll get a basic idea of what's in the book. Okay. They say you can't judge a book by its cover. The novel you're holding in your hand right now proves precisely that point. It's not about stone statues. It's not a sentimental depiction of an Ireland wished for by American tourists, German fly fishermen on vacation, or Italian industrialists looking to buy a castle for a second home. In fact, you might even find the title of this story, The Isle of the Blessed, more than highly ironic. For this novel is the fifth and final installment in author Eugene Christie's foundational and innovative series, the 20th Century Quintet. And it tells the story of Tony Lastoria's grandson, Nick Petrovich, and his beloved Irish sweetheart, Sheila Blake, during the year of internment. It is, in fact, an eyewitness account of that unforgettable chapter of the Troubles, which began exactly 50 years ago this year. The heartbreaking story of two young people in love and how and why they are forced to confront the searing realities of that troubled time. And along the way, to learn perhaps the real meaning of the Isle of the Blessed, a story which should not be forgotten today. Okay, so what I propose to do is to read a section of this book that gives you an idea of what it was like right after the Bloody Sunday Massacre in Derry on January 30th, a Sunday, in 1972. When in Dublin on the following 3 nights, we attacked the British Embassy in Merrion Square. until we finally succeeded in getting it burnt to the ground. So for those of you who have a copy, let's turn to page 274, and I'll start right there. The Dramatus Personae in this section of the book are three young men. Nick Petrovich, who's the American in the story, and he's a member of Cumann Billy Reed on the south side of Dublin. Two fellow members of the same Cumann of Sinn Féin, who are in this section of the story, are Comrade Krishna and Mikko Corrigan. So as we read through this section, those are the people that you're going to encounter. For 3 days and 3 nights, for 3 members of the Cumann Billy Reed, Dublin was transformed into a personal battleground. To the daytime belonged the planning, plotting, scheming, waiting for the cover of darkness. The night was our ally. Our adversary was the Dublin Gardaí. Our refuge was at the bottom of number 33 Leinster Square. Krishna's book-strewn kip was not exactly midway between my flat and Mick's in Mespel Road, but at least it was in between. I lost contact with you and Sheila completely last night, said the comrade. What a mess. Did you two get home okay? I had to leave because we had the kid. I was glad to see you get over that fence all right, said Mick. I know, somebody gave me a boost up. That was me, he said, you dosser. Who's a dosser? You are, you fucking unemployed bollocks. Soon enough, I reckon you'll be on the dole and added to the roles I'm called upon to support. I was sacked, so I won't be eligible. Comrades, said Krishna, let's attend to the task at hand. Strip off the mask of your everyday self, the one who always wanted to please, to be a good boy, to be accepted, one of the herd, a conformist, nobody special. Strip off that mask and underneath you'll find the uncivilized, unsocialized savage with all his nursed grievances and primal urges and unmixed motives, revenge, hatred, love. Thus, Comrade Krishna. The contradictions inherent in the neo-colonialist puppet regime under so-called normal circumstances lie dormant and inactive, but inevitably developments proceed and incidents do occur wherein the true nature of these contradictions are rendered unavoidable or suddenly stark and clear. And then we move to confrontation. It's the duty of the organizer or the individual cadre during the period of confrontation to develop the confrontation along the path towards the collective goal. All that being true and well stated, I suspected that underneath the cogitated analysis lay the raw feelings of revenge, dating all the way back to his father's exile at the hands of the Nehru regime. Exactly the part of Comrade Krishna that he'd never analyzed and never would. As for me, I had a score to settle, and I had no fancy Marxist dialectic to dress it up with. The commonplace civilities of my past life fell away, disowned as compromises, as the empty gestures made in bad faith that they are, and always were and always will be. They take my job away. They deny me my rights and try to strip me of my manhood. They gas my wife and kid. Now it's my turn. The spikes on top of the black railings in Marion Square, they don't give you any room for sitting on the fence, do they? The one who remained opaque and all surface, no depth, to me was Mikko Corrigan. Was he just as he would have said himself, a raw Ute, dropping the TH? I hadn't yet figured out what made a 19-year-old kid up from County Tip, far away from the streets of Belfast or Derry, far from the provocations of living cheek to jowl with the British Army, so avid for the Republican cause, or so dead set on self-immolation. "We're the riot squad," said Mick. "To hell with the Sinn Féin. To hell with the Cumin." "Sometimes the leadership must be led by the people," Krishna agreed. "And this is clearly one of those times." "Right," said Mick. "It's us three. We're a unit. We stick together and we fight together." Gleefully, he rubbed his hands palm to palm. Time for a bit of aggro. That night, Tuesday night, we were ready and resolute. Thousands of marchers invaded Merrion Square, too many to count. Maybe not as many as the night before, but then the women and children were left home on Tuesday. The Gardaí too were ready, and after the previous night, spoiling for a fight. Across the intersections, at both wings of Merrion Square East, hundreds of riot-clad Gardaí in helmets, long truncheons, and shields formed up in human barricades. Loud hailers called on the moving masses of demonstrators to disperse. There was no reply but the steady, wordless onset of the tramp of hundreds of rhythmic boots on the pavements, approaching inexorably the ranks of police from two directions, the two claws of an encircling mob. The lines of police stiffened to resist. No choreography tonight, no symbolic theater orchestrated to appeal to and assuage the deep underground pool of grief and hatred. Tonight was pure anger, unalloyed madness. The loud hailers whinnied with a futile keening. Somebody in the front rank of the marching mass on the south side of the green ran out ahead a little and, skipping like a javelin artist, launched a broken paving stone through the high and arching floodlit mist. At the beginning, though they were hopelessly outnumbered, the police refused to give an inch. On Monday night, they might have been merely doing their reluctant duty of two minds about it. But being attacked by rabble, by the end of the night, they had taken a personal stake in the matter. Now that they'd had a chance to sleep on it, even if only for 3 or 4 hours, on Tuesday night, their pride was invoked. Their appetites were whetted. They wanted to break heads. So they withstood the opening barrage of flung objects, waited for orders, and braced for the clash. The two sides collapsed into one another in a milling embrace, and the parliament of insults broke out. "We're going to burn the fucker, and you better get out of our way. You're not playing in the sandbox, you bleeding shite. Go home and beat your wife. Maybe she can't hit you back." Threats, vows, and oaths accomplished nothing, and the Gardaí cured that with a whistle and a baton charge. Despite our resolve, Mick O'Corrigan's self-styled riot squad got separated at the very first opening bars of the jig. I went down in the first charge and got up again with my face shining with glee. The nervous part was over. We got the first bump out of the way, and now I could cut loose. A confused thrashing on flying feet was going on all around me while I stood there like a statue. I turned to face where I thought the lines of peelers were still standing, but they were already past me, and I began to walk backwards slowly with a sense of beatific calm. A knot of coppers were chasing fleeing rioters along the black railings of a house on the corner across the street. They caught one and began to bludgeon him with their sticks, 3 onto 1. A fourth could get no opening and twisted round to look for another target. He spotted me in the street, and he leapt from the curb, charging straight at me, giving a terrific wind-up for a knockout blow. At the last moment, I dodged my head. The baton went whistling past. I stuck out my foot, and the peeler went sprawling on his face. I hopped up on the footpath and ran straight into a pair of arms. It was Comrade Krishna. "Come on, let's get out of here, man." He began pushing and shoving me up Fitzwilliam Street. I said, "Did you see that bastard go down?" Yeah, move." No, I want to go back." "All right, but first, let's get some ammo." Over my head, I raised a paving stone, and staggering, I hurled it down with all my might onto an exposed curb beside the excavated base of a fire plug, shattering it. Under rusty piped scaffolding, the street fighters clambered up, a Kirkpatrick of bricks on their knees. They were adding a wing onto the National Library in Kildare Street, and the demonstrators were stealing away with the government's building materials to throw at the government's police. With our pockets sagging, Krishna and I filtered through stooping shadows, with other shadows hurrying all around us. We crept along Leinster Street past the Trinity walls, and then through Clare Street, and infiltrated Marion Square from the north side. Inside the railings of the green, the red and blue lights of the police splintered through the trees like the revolving blades of a kaleidoscopic windmill. In Mount Street, fire engines stood coiled in snaking hoses. Light darted brilliantly off chrome and blazed the visors of the Gardaí's riot helmets. It was the fault of those high-intensity floodlights on the roofs of the Garda vans. They were intended to light the scene, but they afforded our side a fringe of deep shadow to hide in. As we crept up, we could see in the first floor windows of the embassy, glass gleamed in shards, and the drapes hung down, charred rags. The embassy door still stood locked and paralyzed in the doorway, and the beleaguered peelers peered out of their cage of light, hunting the darkness beyond it for their hidden attackers. They were lit up for us, while we were protected by the night. The gas was your only hazard, but even the CS gas could put you out of action only momentarily. You retreated and recovered and went right back again. When the Gardaí charged, you faded away into the lanes and side streets. They could not venture too far from the embassy lest the mob streak in behind them and finish the job. They were trapped in their defensive posture. Even the gas was blown back in their faces every time the breeze shifted. The Gardaí could muster only so many men, and for these there could be no rest, while the rioters came on in waves, each one fresher and more daring than the last. There were too many vulnerable points in too many directions for the attackers to come at them, too many vehicles to protect. There were the firefighters to be defended, and the costly engines without which they could not hope to save the embassy when it did go up. It was going to be a long night. Somewhere in the confusion of the ebb and flow fighting, Comrade Krishna and I bumped into O'Corrigan again. "Where the hell have you been?" "Mount Street," said Mick. "The embassy's on fire from the rear. There's a bit of a laneway." Mick grabbed me. "I saw you go down. I couldn't get to you." "It's okay. I got up again." "What about the lane?" said Krishna. "I'll show you," said Mick. "Come on with me." Reunited, our riot squad set out on a long detour around Stevens Green and Fitzwilliam Square. Mick lived nearby in Mespel Road, so he knew all the back lanes and shortcuts. Powers Court, for instance, was a lane leading out of Mount Street Crescent and down between the backs of the buildings to the rear door of the embassy. It was engulfed in darkness, broken only by a single bare bulb wired to a drain pipe. Past the dissipating pool of light, the lane curved a little, and you saw smoke, curlicues of flame, the silhouettes of firemen in their black slickers with the yellow hems, the sheen of water in the gutters, heaps of hoses. In the dark, I stumbled against a rubbish bin, but the Gardaí never heard the clangor because they were caught in an enclosed space trying to ward off a surge of rioters attacking the firefighters down a lane leading in from Mount Street. I held my breath as if that would keep me from making a noise and looked at the other two. Mick signaled, and the three of us crept forward again, keeping close to the shadow walls of Powers Court. Mick spotted a fireman's short-handled axe, which had fallen on the cobblestones in the melee. He kept his hand and hissed over his shoulder, "Hit them while I get in there." He stole up with small steps stealthily, and we jumped out and launched our missiles. Mick was chopping with short two-handed strokes at the canvas-covered hide of a fire hose. "Look out," I called. A cop squared off with his baton raised over Mick's head. Mick looked up and the cop caught the gleam of the axe blade. He hesitated. He must have feared that if he came down on Mick's head, the fooker might not like it and might swing the axe at his knees. Reinforcements wheeled about from the main fray, and one guard shouted at Mick, "Drop it." Krishna was dragging Mick backwards into the shadows and managed to wrest the axe out of his hand. It clattered to the cobblestones and lay there gleaming like a chipped tooth. 4 of the guardies stepped over it and advanced cautiously into the wall of darkness in Powers Court. We retreated backwards up the lane, step by step, shouting imprecations like a numberless tribe. I picked up the rubbish bin lid and sent it bouncing loudly over the cobblestones at our adversaries. The 3 of us turned and ran quickly as we could through the pool of light from the bare bulb on the drain pipe. Over our shoulders, we could see the police start picking up their flat feet to sprint after us. Now they knew there were only 3 of us. In the crescent, Mick shouted, "Split up! Rendezvous tomorrow," yelled Krishna, "at my place." I peeked out from behind the lane I found myself hiding in. I was thinking home by the Burlington Road, Appian Way, Ranelagh, stay off the main streets. But I was facing the critical crossing, the open air of the Grand Canal, and the lights all around the Bagot Street Bridge. Once across the canal, I thought I would disappear in the shadows again. I sauntered across the bridge with my hands in my pockets and turned calmly down the footpath along the concrete post and cable fence that ran knee-high along the grassy canal bank of the Mespel Road. I had the feeling that Mick must be safe home by now behind closed doors, as he lived just a short distance ahead at the rear of the row houses on the left coming up. I was just turning to cross over to Burlington Road, thinking I had made it, when a spotlight over my shoulder froze me. A dark car on the bridge with the interior light on, and 4 hatless men shoulder to shoulder in the front and back. I heard the car door open and slam shut again. Then the sweep of their spotlight back and forth blinded me again. I turned and walked straight along the canal bank. I wouldn't wait for them, but I wouldn't appear to run away either. I needed a second to think. Slowly, the car nosed around the balustrade of the bridge, and slowly in first gear, it crept past me, blinding me with the spotlight again, so that I had to squint and throw my hand up over my eyes as they were rolling to a halt up ahead. 3 men in a sudden hurry tumbled out. Blue suits, silver buttons, no hats or helmets, no badges. When I saw the batons in their hands, I knew they were not going to ask me any questions. I jumped over the low cable fence and slipped down the banking. 2 of the peelers jumped after me. The 3rd danced along the footpath, beating his baton on the chain-link black cables suspended between each concrete post. The 4th waited ahead of me, peering over the balustrade of the Bagot Street Bridge. They had me hemmed in. I scrambled. The slope of the banking was steep and slippery, and already my wet feet were waterlogged. Behind me, the mud of the water margin sucked at the shoes of my pursuers, bogging them down in clumsiness, but still, I was running out of room. I looked up, and the cop on the bridge had come around on the footpath and was flinging his foot up over the cable. In the shadow cast by the bridge, a dark mass loomed. The canal lock. Massive timbers soaked in pitch and gleaming with tar black splinters. At the wings of the lock, whitewashed buttresses sloped into the earth, sunk into the double bankings of the canal. The cop coming over the cable slipped and slid on his backside down the dewy slope right under my feet. His grasping fingers closed on the sucking whoosh at my heels. On my knees, I clambered up the buttress of the canal lock. I grabbed at the metal stanchions. I pulled and propelled my body forward. I tripped on a protruding bolt, and my foot slipped down into the space between the groaning timbers. Looking down, I could hear the wash of the canal water. Slap, slap. Everything was moving in slow motion. Glancing streetlights hitting sliding facets of little waves cut into quarter moons. I yanked and my wet foot came, but the muddy shoe stayed. I grabbed at the second stanchion of the lock, and a splinter of the ancient waterlogged black wood scored my sock-soaked foot. I flung myself with a leap onto the grass of the far bank. I ran along Wilson Terrace and into the dark end of Wilson Place with one shoe on. My only hope was that the Keystone cops behind me wouldn't be able to get out of each other's way. But running as fast as I could with only one shoe, I came out in Ladd Lane, and they weren't following. I sprinted across the road and under an arch. I was in a courtyard, and a second arch led out of it into the next street. I slowed and stumbled over the cobblestones in the driveway under the arch. I went close to the wall and looked out from under the overhang. Nothing. A deserted section of street. Where were they? Could they have doubled back to their motor to pursue me in their cruiser? I wouldn't put it past them. Could they have been called away on their car radio? I just didn't know. Across the road, a green with the usual black railings. Then I heard the steps on the cobblestones coming distantly behind me. I didn't have to look. I knew who it was. One last chance. I'd try for the green. Maybe there's a back way out. When I darted into the street, I heard the screeching wheels come careening around the corner from Cumberland Road. I stopped myself, skipped off to the right, back up on the footpath, and I began my one-footed run again. But when I looked up, my heart sank. There at the far end of the street was the whole floodlit television studio of Marion Square, the posse of police vans, the full-throated clamor of the riot around the embassy still going on late into the night. I had made a circle back into Fitzwilliam Street, straight back into the net. Behind me, I heard gear shifts grinding and the angry whir of acceleration. I stopped, not knowing which way to turn, stumbling up against the railings in front of a house, brushing my pea-coat collar on the spikes. I was tired, out of breath. I staggered up the walk to the house. My unshod foot hurt. It felt like it was bleeding. Maddeningly, I was thinking, thank God the splinter didn't penetrate my foot. I wouldn't have gotten this far. I turned to face them. 3 of them were climbing out of the Garda car right in front of this house. I went backwards up a pair of short steps and leaned with a sigh against the closed door. They came around the fenders of their little Ford Cortina with satisfied smirks, arranging the hems of their coats, fashioning their battens. I leaned heavily against the door and my knees were turning to water when the door gave way and I fell on my butt in a carpeted hallway. A priest in a soutane stepped over me and out onto the front step. May I help you, gentlemen? We want that man, Father. Step out of the way, please. This man is here to see me. I sat up and drew my face back into the shadow of the half-open door. It's a bit late for confessions, Father. The Lord works his own hours, Sergeant. Now, Father, you will not enter a holy house to do this dirty work, roared the priest. He advanced down the step and glared at them from their suddenly heated faces to their muddy shoes, up and down. You men ought to be ashamed of yourselves. One of the cops hesitated, unsure of himself. The second withdrew a step like a chastised schoolboy. But the sergeant was adamant. "I'll not forget this." "Are you threatening me?" the priest bellowed. "What's your name?" The priest looked down on the other two. "Where are your badges? By what authority do you come here seeking to mete out instantaneous justice without benefit of judge or jury?" "We only meant to arrest him, Father," said the embarrassed one meekly. "On what grounds?" The sergeant said quickly. "Inciting to riot and disturbing the peace. Is that enough for you? Or shall I add assault on the police in their lawful line of duty?" "And how do you know this is your man?" "Well, if he isn't, why did he run from us?" "Because he knew, Sergeant, you were going to beat him with your sticks and leave him for dead." "No, you had no intention of arresting him." The priest raised his arm and pointed up Fitzwilliam Street. "Well, what do you think the disturbances of this night are all about? You ought to be burning down that embassy yourselves if you were any sort of Irishman. Now get out of my sight, all of you." And he slammed the door in their faces. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed listening to that as much as I did reading it. And now, if there are any questions about this book or anything else, I'd be happy to take a drink of water and then answer your questions.
Yeah, books for sale this evening.
Yes, I do have books for sale. I'm offering a special discount price that's lower than the price on Amazon tonight for our good friends of the 1916 committee here in Cranston. So it's about 1/3 off. And if you can give me $19.99, then this book can be yours. And I would be happy to sign it for you. Yes, Nancy. Yes, I'll be happy to talk about that. Thank you for that. That's a great question, Nancy. Hold on a second. This book here, which is the fourth in my series, tells the story of how Nick Petrovich, when he's a student at Boston College, meets a young lady from County Mayo, a farmer's daughter named Sheila Blake, how they fall in love, and when Nick graduates from Boston College, they get married in Boston. And then they move to Rhode Island, where Nick is going to do 2 years at URI, culminating in the events of May 1970, when the Cambodian invasion took place at the hands of the Nixon regime, when the 4 students at Kent State were killed by the National Guard, shot down, and when the students at Jackson State were similarly victims of the authorities gone amiss. And at that point in the story, Nick and Sheila, when he's graduated from URI, go back to the Merrimack Valley up in Massachusetts, where Nick continues his activities of organizing against the Vietnam War, but instead of within the ivory tower of a college campus, he's now doing it in the middle of a derelict New England mill city down at the Heels, on the city common. And among the people who come to photograph the anti-war rallies on the common are not only photographers from the local newspaper, but also the FBI. And sorry, having a job in a Johnson era poverty program, what happens to Nick is that the FBI pays a visit to Nick's boss in his office at the poverty program. And if you will recall, unbeknownst to the general populace at the time, this was the period of Richard Nixon's COINTELPRO program, where he was turning his dirty tricks on the task of spying on the people who he said were against him, against his government, and against the war in Vietnam. So that's why the FBI was taking photographs of people who were doing anti-war rallies in places like working class communities, like this mill city in the Merrimack Valley. And so, having lost his job, and all of this story is in volume 4, at that point in time, Nick decides that it's time to get out of the country. And since he has connections in Ireland through his wife's family, that's where he intends to go to start a new life in another country, which he feels is a better place to be, and which is his wife's home country, and where she would like to raise their children and have their family life in the place that she calls home, where she had an idyllic childhood. So when this book is over, volume 4, and you come to the beginning of the Isle of the Blessed, the first line in the Isle of the Blessed talks about when Nick leaves the United States and flies to Ireland on the Aer Lingus. So the first line says, "I landed in Ireland about a fortnight after internment began in August of 1971. And so that's the background, Nancy, to why Nick went to Ireland, okay? It was for all the reasons that I just talked about. Yes.
It made wonder why Irishmen were fighting Irishmen, and the Gardaí at the time. And I have my own memories of the special branch who were around the border, and I feel like the priest in the story represents the Irish people, and these Gardaí in Dublin. The Gardaí are a mixed bunch, and you can say that really well because the Gardaí in the country areas often supported the Republican movement, but in the hierarchy and the special branch always struck me as why were they so viciously against the Republican movement? And it's hard to understand. It might be a hard concept here to get why the Irishmen, the Gardaí, who shouldn't be standing up for the Irish people in the north of Ireland, especially after Bloody Sunday, were the ones who were beating the other Irish men. And I wonder just have you any thoughts about it, explaining it to people here, because I think it is a hard concept. For me growing up, I couldn't understand why these Irish police force were against us and weren't there to help us. So I just thought it was quite worth mentioning.
Well, thank you for that question. That's a great question, Tricia. My feeling about the 3 days following the Bloody Sunday Massacre in the rest of Ireland, the 26 counties, as opposed to the 6 occupied counties, is that outrage was felt by all of the Irish people across the board in general. And this outrage had to find an outlet somehow. So spontaneously on the first day after Bloody Sunday, when people got up for work on Monday morning in the city of Dublin, far from Derry, nobody went to work. Instead, they just gathered in the streets or around their radios and tellies and waited for something to happen. And what they wanted to happen wasn't specified by anybody except by the will of the people. And gradually, it became known that the people wanted to march upon the British Embassy in Merrion Square in Dublin in order to express their outrage. So the first night, the Monday night after Bloody Sunday in Dublin, was a case of 50,000 people just descending upon Merrion Square and having no place to put them all, but without any organized effort to do anything except to be there to register their protest at this unlawful killing of unarmed civilians in Derry by the paras. So feelings were so high and intense at that point that the Dublin Gardaí were called out, I think, by the Fianna Fáil government of Jack Lynch in order to demonstrate to the British government in London that Jack Lynch's government intended to protect British property in Dublin. So the fact that the Gardaí were there guarding the British embassy, all that did was further incense the 50,000 people who marched on the embassy that first night. So when rioting broke out, it was disorganized, it was spontaneous, it was unplanned, and it was simply an expression of the people who were angry that their fellow Irishmen in the Gardaí were there to protect property when that was the government who had shot down the 13 unarmed civilians. On the second night, the Tuesday night, which I read about here, it was a different story. The 50,000 people did not show up bringing their children by the hand to, watch the riot as if this were the first battle of Bull Run back in the Civil War. And it was entertainment. On the second night, it was those who were determined to burn down that symbol of British misrule in Ireland that had stood for centuries, ever since Strongbow first came to the island 800 years before. And so that's why in the passage I read here, you see the rioters were more organized, they were more intent on getting the embassy burned. Now, what happened on the third night? Why did it take 3 nights to get the thing burnt down? Well, if you've ever been in Merrion Square, the location of the British Embassy was a set of Georgian row houses, and every house was attached to every other house, hip to hip. There were party walls between each one. The embassy was not a freestanding building. So on the third night, it was the Provost's IRA that came out to join the organized resistors and members of Sinn Féin, like ourselves, to help us to burn down the embassy and finally get the job done, because this was the third night, and even no one could conceive of this going on any longer. So what happened on this night was, all of a sudden, the Dublin Gardaí stand aside and open a path to the front door of the embassy so that the IRA, with their petrol bombs and so on, and their masks on, so to hide their identities, and their explosives, because the first thing they did was to set explosives on the front door to blow it off its hinges so that they could get inside to the interior of the embassy to better set it on fire. And I recall that we stood there watching as an IRA member climbed up a volunteer climbed up a drain pipe to the balcony on the first floor. And when he got over the railing, his comrades threw up some petrol bombs. He kicked in the windows, and there were ceiling to floor drapes. And he set those on fire, and he threw some petrol bombs into the interior of that room. So now they had the embassy going on the ground floor and the first floor. And gradually, as time went by, it didn't take too long, but when we saw those tongues of flame burst out of the top floor, third floor windows of the British embassy, we knew she was gone. And it was one of the most incredible feelings I ever had in my life. But at that point, as we watched the cinders of the flames rising up into the night sky, 50,000 voices all together. It was like the sounds coming up from the ground beneath your feet, up through your feet and your legs, up into your chest, and all were singing the one song, "A Nation Once Again." Jim.
I hate to ask a question after that wonderful ending right there, but in the unlikely or likely event of a possible unification referendum in the North, I've heard some talk about that with my friend Shmar. If that vote were to take place next week, what are your feelings about how that vote would go?
Well,
Anyone else want to answer that question?
I'll throw it out there. The latest poll says 60% of the Republic would be in favor of a united Ireland.
My
That's the
friends in
latest
Ireland
poll.
tell me the exact opposite.
No, that's the latest poll, and it was a 60% majority, which is why the more in the Republic,
Okay,
60% in the Republic.
but what if a vote was taken in the North?
I can't give you an exact figure on that, but we do know that the majority party in the North is Sinn Féin. So we would have to assume, I think, that would be the same. And border polls have been in favor, and I think they've always been over 50%.
I wonder if they've ever done a poll in the North regarding that particular issue, fairly recently.
I'm not sure.
I read
It's on
something
border
last,
polls.
I read something last week,
Yeah,
and it was from Sinn Féin. They basically said, in 10 years, there's no doubt,
oh, definitely.
Yeah,
No
yeah.
doubt.
United Ireland.
Yeah,
but that they would vote in the North for a united Ireland.
Yeah.
and I have to say, your story parallels the politics in Ireland today, right? And
Yeah.
we see the majority of the people, what the people want, and then we have this hierarchy in government who just don't hear. These career politicians that you mentioned, it's the same story. They're not in tune with the people. And, that's what's happening right now. That's why we're not moving forward with this referendum, because the Irish government at the moment are like, they're putting a standstill on it. People clearly want the referendum to come.
That's right, Tricia. And the only thing I can add to that is that in my time there, when we were attacking the British embassy, what the third night proved to me was kind of the duplicity of the Dublin government. On the first night and the second night, they appeared to put all their forces arrayed against the people, their own people, and in order to protect British property. Then on the third night, they simply stood aside and let the IRA do the job. Now, to me, that could not have happened unless there had been an agreement between Jack Lynch and the heads of Sinn Féin and the Provost IRA, so that this entire chapter of the 3 days of protest against Bloody Sunday could be brought to a close. In other words, it was for the convenience of the Dublin government to let the IRA do their worst. And this was a mark, a supreme mark of their insincerity, if I could put it that way. Thank you very much. You were a great audience.
A few words in closing, and then people can come up and purchase a book if you're interested and get it autographed, etc. One thing in response to Jim's question, and this always comes up about the reunification and votes and things like that, and Trish and Gina accurately portraying they were career politicians. What they're afraid about is losing their power, losing their money, and everything like that in both dominant parties in the South. But we should keep in mind that there's not going to be a poll next week. There's not going to be a vote next week. When Scotland voted for independence, there was an 18-month campaign where people could put out their side, their positions. If there's a reunification referendum in Ireland, it'll be the same thing. It's not going to happen immediately. People will have to argue their points, and people will be won over or not based on a logical, discussion. This is what, people prayed for, get the gun out and have this like kind of democracy. Of course, we know democracy can be rigged, and we know that it was rigged in Dublin 2 years ago at the last election when Fine Gael and Fine Gael decided to keep the majority party out of the government because they were connected to terrorists. Like, those two parties weren't started by the same kind of freedom fighters. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not going to happen like all of a sudden. There's going to be thorough discussion about it. But just before closing, I want to ask Marie to come up. She has an important announcement about a raffle that's going to go on downstairs for the benefit of the people in the North.
So thank you, everybody, for coming tonight and listening. Thank you very much for your words. The Ladies Ancient Order of Hibernians has a subgroup. Well, I think it's in the men's group too, Freedom for All Ireland. And they do a Christmas campaign every year. And then in January, they go over Martin. And they go around to the different organizations, social services agencies, and they pass out this money. So this year, the Providence Ladies Hibernians, we are putting on a raffle, and it's going to take place tonight. We have a lovely liquor basket, and then we have a gift package for Bailey's. So we ask that you would see some of, well, myself and others selling the tickets. They're going to be $1 each or 6 for $5. And we'll be doing the drawing tonight. Am I right about that? Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, so listen, in closing, we can say we've had a real good year. We got through the pandemic. We had Zoom lectures. Oh, we have a lecture set up for the last Friday in January. It won't be in conflict with the K-League Club's general membership meeting. There's just an unfortunate situation because of the holidays. But the last Friday in January, we're going to have Tim Hoyt here. He's a historian. He works at the Newport Naval War College, and he's going to speak on the treaty ending the War of Independence in 1921. So that's going to be a really fascinating thing. A lot of us can learn a lot more about that. But beyond that, I'd like to just thank everybody for coming. I'd like to thank everybody for everything you've done this year, especially the K-League Club opening their doors for us. I don't know where the hell we'd be without this hall, to have these lectures, to have the fundraisers and things like that that we do here. And let's just say,
Whoever worked on the sound system did a good job.
you know, I was so worried about this point. I didn't think Gene was going to reach the back of the room without the microphone. Yeah. Okay, hey, very good. And Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Kwanzaa, Kathy, wait, one more thing, Kathy. All right, music in the cafes at night and revolution in the air. Okay, anyone want to talk with Gene? He can talk all night.